Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DriveThruRPG review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplement material at DriveThruRPG.com. This video, I'll be reviewing the dungeon crawl adventure The Darkness Beneath Dalentown by Tim Bannock and Matthew Bannock for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Review copies have been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links when making any purchases on DriveThruRPG and the DM's Guild, and you can support me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, and Chris, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, Yuma, Marcos Dade, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, A.K., Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Ross, Limpy Spuds, and Jerome. Thank you all very much for your support. Darkness Beneath Dalentown is a Tier 2 adventure, specifically levels 5 through 10. It is a slime-filled dungeon, a pretty big dungeon, and this adventure is like 2 steps forward and 2 steps back to me. The advantages are it has gorgeous battle maps, which is such a big reoccurring complaint I have for a lot of products. You know, they just, for whatever reason, tend to skimp on the maps. I mean, I realize that can cost a significant amount of money if you're actually going to commission somebody to make good quality maps, but it makes such a great difference for me personally, as someone who mostly plays on VTTs. Having gorgeous battle maps makes such a big difference, especially when your adventure is mainly just a dungeon crawl, which is what this is. And this provides Elven Tower maps, which I love. Awesome, awesome style. On the other hand, it's even more minimal than an Adventures League module. So it's very much set up like a pretty quick one-shot, but the intro is very, very quick and minimized in terms of the information, and there's not even any role-playing scenes or anything like that. Kind of skips Act 1. And then you've got your big dungeon crawl, which also is very minimal information. It's just kind of room to room. Here's what's in each room. And it's mostly like 90% combat. And then there's no epilogue or conclusion after that. So it's pretty astonishing how little information there was, given how big of a dungeon crawl that we get. And it's a bummer because, the slime theme is always a good one. It's it's not the first slime themed dungeon that I've reviewed, and probably won't be the last. Folks seem to love their slimes, but it doesn't capitalize on any of that other than just throwing a bunch of, slime themed or slimes themselves, oozes, and those kind of creatures at you. Now, we do get a lot of new creature stat blocks, which are always cool, and that's something you kind of tend to have to do with DriveThruRPG because you don't get a lot of the you don't get as many of the copyrighted material, like the town names and certain monsters and all that, which are which are available in the DM's Guild. You only get them in if you actually use their hello, sweetheart. Coronavirus has the kiddo home from school. So I've got very mixed feelings about it, and it does provide a multiple formatting, which is interesting. And the designer specifically asked me to look at the different formats, which there's an 8x11, there's a 9x6, and there's a landscape mode. And it does more than just try and organize things to make it look like that. The smaller one, the 9x6, actually gets rid of almost all of the art and kind of reorganizes some of the sections into like a pocketbook format, which is cool. And I think that's actually a pro. And I really haven't seen any other products offer multiple formats like that. It's usually just the one, 8x11, pretty standard, and away we go. And this time I can kind of flip back and forth. It does make a pretty big difference in terms of what you see. It embeds the images a lot better. Like the maps, for example, this one is actually embedded in that section of level 1. Whereas here you can see there's no, we do have all the art, which looks really nice, but there's no dungeon map. You actually have to skip all the way to the end to get the dungeon map. So I prefer this style, which puts it in the middle of the text, with the caveat that we also get a full separate PDF that has huge. In fact, I can show it to you. I still have it open. You can see here we get the full separate PDF of the battle maps. Again, Elven Tower, amazing art style. I love these maps. This is a huge thumbs up for me. And so many products skimp on the map design. So that's just friggin' awesome. Like, huge thumbs up for this. And yes, they do come in the DM maps, which have the annotations on here, and the player maps, which don't have any of those annotations. You can actually use those to play on. So that's a huge plus. So it's interesting that we get these different versions, and you can see the text is a lot bigger because it's the smaller page size. We don't get the art, but we do get the map. So maybe it would be easier to print this one versus the other one. So I think that's cool that we do get the multiple formatting. It's pretty nice. The landscape one is less useful, and it looks weird because obviously it's all, zoomed out and everything's landscape wise, but it's cool to get all those different versions out there. I do like that. Although the one with the art ultimately looks better. Unfortunately, if you notice, there is no there is layout here. Obviously, everything's going to have a layout when you're producing something with art and text on the same page, but it's all just plain white background. And the bar has been raised. Like, so many products that I've looked at and reviewed have exceptionally gorgeous layouts and presentation formatting, and that stuff does matter. You don't need that stuff to create a good product, but it can elevate a product to be really, really awesome, or it could drag an otherwise okay product down. And this is unfortunately closer to the latter than the former. Had it had a lot of extra bells and whistles, that would have honestly made things a lot easier to overlook or accept. But unfortunately, because it's so plain in terms of the text and the background and all that, it's easier to see all the glaring problems that I had with it. So there's also a bit of issue I had with the writing, and this is something that I myself am guilty of, and I am literally a professional writer, which is, you really need an editor. You need somebody else that's going to edit your text that's not you. And I have this issue. Obviously, all the stuff that I write on my personal website are, not professionally edited by somebody else. It's just me. And I tend to be extremely verbose in my writing. Surprise, I do videos too, and I have fun doing that because I talk a lot. And I tend to type out a lot of times as I was talking. You'll end up typing like, so, blah, 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 and like here, as things do. But, and these are all extra words that you just need to get rid of. Like, there's a way to tighten up how to write everything to make it way more readable. And that is a problem that I immediately saw here. And I know because I myself am guilty of typing that way. And, it's too conversational. It's too casual, and there's too many words, and there's a way to clean that up. It's not something like a typo or grammatical error that you're going to catch on a spell check. This is, you really need somebody else to go through, look at it, and say, all right, here's how we're going to clean this up and just create a tighter, better read. I didn't include that as a con in my final pros and cons because it really only was in this background section. And unfortunately, there's not really another area where there's a lot of writing, because all of these rooms are very short and pretty simple, like combat encounters, essentially. So it wasn't big enough to be a huge detracting element, but it is something that I noticed where, man, this could have really used somebody else to look over it and kind of and clean that up. But that wasn't even the biggest problem. The problem is there's just not enough information to run this module. I mean, it is just a dungeon crawl, and the dungeon itself isn't interesting enough either. So the setup, which isn't bad, is they dug too deep. There was a woman a mage who was attempting to clear out some tunnels using oozes, which is kind of a fun idea. And things go horribly wrong. A demon lord of ooze ends up capturing her, and she gets turned into some ooze demon herself, and she frees herself from that decades later, and then goes on and starts to want to go on a rampage on the surface world, and then that connects to the sewers beneath this town of Dalentown, and now all these slime and ooze monsters are crawling up out of the woodworks and attacking the town. That's a fine start, but there's never a scene where the mayor of the town meets with the heroes, or they get a call. You're missing like that Act 1 section. What we get is an event timetable, which basically works like a series of random encounters that are supposed to motivate the heroes into, okay, we need to realize what's going on with all of these slime monsters coming up and go down there. But there's no it's missing that classic like NPC offering the heroes money to go down and do a job, basically. Instead, they're just supposed to see all these bad things happening, and then they decide to go down into the sewers and deal with it. So I felt like there was a missing bit in the introduction. The um, the better way to handle this event timetable would have been, instead of giving us like a 7 things, of just cut this down into like 2 or 3 events that happen around town and create more of a, actual people that are being harassed. And then finally, like at the end of all these different scenes, you've got somebody or a crowd of people that like approaches the heroes because maybe they're in a tavern, or they're tier 2, so they should be decently well known in the area or something. And then they say, hey, we've pooled together some money. Or again, a leader of the town says, we've got this problem, and the heroes have seen this problem firsthand because these events are happening. Like, that would have worked better. So I think that's the idea that we were supposed to get here, but it's not executed very well. The sewers themselves are just supposed to be a bunch of random encounters, which I'm never a fan of. I mean, it's not horrible, but this is already an extremely combat heavy dungeon, and to create just a series of random encounters with no flavor text whatsoever is never ideal. And then these dungeons themselves are basically nothing but a series of combat. There's just nothing else going on. There's a few like secret doors. There's this one like magic library that shuts its door after a time, but there's no like big, puzzles or traps. There's nobody to talk to in here, even though it seems like there would be, with a bunch of rat folk that are kind of hiding out in one of the areas. So it seems like that could have been a really interesting like role-playing social opportunity, but there's no notes on that at all. There's no, I mean, it doesn't go anywhere with that. It just kind of puts these rat folk there, and then it's like, well, I guess it's another combat encounter. Like, we don't, there's nothing on there about how to run that or create some more social opportunities. So it's a neat idea for a dungeon crawl. There's a lot of really cool new slime and ooze themed monsters, which is cool. Like, literally over 20 of them. In fact, I can show you right here at the end. And it's not just slimes. There's a few other things, but it's supposed to be an ooze themed. It's the boss is this ooze demon. Which, by the way, to give you an example of how there's a minimal amount of information, the final boss room just says, Sidine, a greater ooze demon, can be found here. That's the final climactic boss battle of the entire dungeon, and it's a sentence. That's extremely disappointing. There's no villain monologue. There's no tactics. There's no. And by the way, please, I cannot stress this enough. Don't leave your bosses by themselves. I don't care how powerful your boss is, unless it specifically has, at the bare minimum, legendary actions and layer actions to create additional. To balance that action economy. You cannot leave your bosses by themselves. It's just not going to work. You have to have minions to have something for it, because the action economy is going to destroy your boss. There's 4 or 5 heroes. They've all got multi attacks. They've all got bonus actions and shit going on. Do not leave your bosses by themselves, and especially don't just mention it like it's another combat fight. Do something with it. Do something with your boss. Man, this villainous. There is a cool note in the beginning that says, all of these oozes and slimes that appear, you can have the boss speak through them, which is nice. And that's the only notes we get. It's right here, Sidine and the oozes. It says there's no mechanics for this, but Sidine should be able to see and hear through each ooze and communicate through them. But it's just a few sentences about, she can hurl insults at the adventurers or otherwise try and create a more flavorful encounter. And that's good. You need that because there's nothing else going on here from a role-playing or social standpoint. And there's not enough information on Sidine or what she's all about. And the final confrontation is literally she can be found here. Like, okay, that's too much. Like, obviously a good DM can take whatever story seeds and run with them. But if you're purchasing something that's professionally made and published, you need to have that information here, and at least be proud of your boss that you've created and had the background there to, have a final room with a meaningful encounter. I was also confused about a particular layout design in these dungeons, and I had to assume, first of all, I swear there's an error because the notes on going from level 3 to 4 are not there. So there's a secret door in level 3, which you can only get to by making a ghost happy or by having a good investigation check. So it seems like there's a hard stop right there. If you don't have a good skill check, you can't get to the bottom of this dungeon. That's obviously always a problem. You can't put those kind of things up on the main quest. But it doesn't mention, it just says there's a secret door here and then nothing else. And then I had to look on the map and say, like, okay, it looks like there's a staircase in that secret door. So I guess that's how you get to level 4, because the only other staircase goes back up to level 2. But then when you get to level 4, it says that the stairs lead up to level 2. So that might just be a typo. I'm not sure. It's very confusing. And there's 2 different levels on 4. There's a 4A and a 4B. And I was also confused about, well, how do we get to 4A and how do we get to 4B and how are they connected? So I finally looked at the maps, and you can see, I think these are supposed to be on top of one another. So this is one big map, because it looks like, and to give you a better example, it looks like there's a 5-foot wide hallway with kind of green slime going on here. And then when we get to the other level 4, it looks like it extends north from here. There's no information or details about how these maps are connected at all. I am just inferring based on looking at the maps. That's not good. There needs to be some concrete information. First of all, clear up whatever error that is about the secret staircase and all that, but also explain that, there needs to be an arrow here that says go from this map to this map, because I was utterly confused about how these things are connected or how you even get to this map and all that. There was just some confusion there, which is not good, because again, the entire adventure revolves around this dungeon crawl. So you need to have as much information present as possible. So it's a bummer, because I fell in love with these maps the second I saw them. I think the idea of a slime themed kind of mega dungeon beneath a town, that classic dug too deep, you get through the sewers and it just keeps going deeper and darker. And I love that there's different themes. You start off with the sewers, and then you get to this like dwarven library, then you get to the actual mine cart, and it's just, you get deeper and deeper. All that is really cool, but the actual dungeon is not very interesting. It's all combat, and I think there's a lot of organizational issues with how things are set up, and then there's no actual epilogue or conclusion after the fact. There's no ending whatsoever. It just goes right into the bestiary. So it's 2 steps forward, it's 2 steps back. There's some good qualities and there's some bad qualities, and let's go over them with my pros and cons for The Darkness Beneath Dalentown. Pros: 5 full color dungeon maps by Elven Tower Cartography. Huge thumbs up for that. If every single adventure used that quality of maps for the battle maps, I would be a super happy camper. Pros: over 20 new monster stat blocks, including over 10 new oozes and slimes. I think I kind of glossed over that, but we actually do get a lot of really fun monster designs. Basically scales up a lot of the oozes to make it appropriate for a tier 2 party. But also, I just like the idea here because, especially when you have players who have played D&D for years and years, it's really difficult not to metagame almost just on accident, because you might know, like, oh, well, we're fighting, an ochre jelly. I know exactly what that can do, even though, maybe, and, hats off to you all that play through and you were like, well, my player wouldn't know that they're, immune from lightning or whatever, so I'm going to cast lightning and learn something. That's great, but this does help solve the problem by basically offering different new variants that players haven't seen before. So that is a cool pro, and there's a bunch of new ones in here, which is really fun and cool. And pro, I do like the multiple page formatting. So it is really interesting that we get like a pocketbook version and a landscape version. That's really cool, and it's just a pure positive, because you have those options available depending on which one you like more. Cons: the dungeon is almost entirely focused on combat. There's no real puzzles. Exploration. If you count just moving around a dungeon as exploration, then I guess there's some there, but there's no social encounters whatsoever. It's pretty much just every room is either combat or nothing. Other con: minimal or missing information throughout basically the entire product. The final battle is very minimal, and like I was very confused by connecting the final dungeon levels. All of that was bad. And then con: there's no conclusion or epilogue. I don't know how the town feels. I don't know how, the whole Sedin thing would have, if there was an actual encounter here, would have helped clear up that epilogue. Like, that would have been nice to see. And again, you can just have, a paragraph is a little short, but something in there to help clear things up and make it an actual ending. Final verdict: The Darkness Beneath Dalentown provides the seeds of a slime-filled multi-dungeon crawl, but suffers from minimal information and an over-reliance on combat. Thank you everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.